Everyone's heard stories about the strange and unexplainable. I never believed in them, not until that December night. This is the story of how a simple half-whole mask saved my life, and why I haven't slept without it since. It started as a normal drive north from California to Oregon. I was heading home for the holidays, the weather a little worse than expected, but nothing I thought I couldn't handle. I had snow tires after all. But as the snow piled up, it became clear that this storm was more than I bargained for. The snow was relentless, piling up and whipping against my windshield, making the already empty, narrow road feel increasingly claustrophobic. I knew I had to stop for the night, but there was no exit, no gas station, not even a turnoff, nothing but white. Then finally, a narrow, dark path appeared just ahead, a miracle in that endless stretch of snow. I could make out 2 wooden poles marking the entrance. I figured this was my chance to get off the road and maybe find shelter. I turned in, and after a rough, bumpy ride on what felt like gravel, the shadow of a small cabin came into view. It was eerie. The place was pitch dark, no lights on inside, and no car in sight, but the cabin looked solid enough, maybe abandoned, maybe someone's vacation home. The snow was falling heavier now, and the cold bit into me. With my mask pulled snugly over my face, I trudged up to the cabin door and knocked 3 times. Nothing. I tried calling out, "Hello? I'm just looking for a place to warm up. Is anyone here?" Silence. I tried the handle. It was unlocked, so I opened it and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and quiet. I took out my phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. The walls were decorated with typical landscapes, paintings of rivers, forests. But there was one that stood out. A portrait of a Victorian family. 2 adults, a teenage girl, and a small child. The parents' and child's faces were strange, though. They were featureless, like smooth, stretched skin. Only the teenage girl had eyes, a nose, a mouth. Her face was hauntingly beautiful, yet unsettling. After a few minutes, I decided I'd stay. I'd only be there a few hours, just enough to let the storm pass. I made my way to a back bedroom, hoping I'd be alone. I bundled up in my jacket and pulled my half mask over my face again to keep warm. Before lying down, I set an alarm for 4:30 a.m. so I could get back on the road at the first light. I crawled into the bed, tired but tense. The room was so silent, my heartbeat echoed in my ears. It was the scratching that woke me up. The sound was faint at first, but unmistakable. I lay there, frozen, the scratching getting louder, coming from a closed door on the other side of the room. My mind raced. Maybe it was just a rat or a raccoon, maybe an animal had slipped inside to escape the storm too. But as the scratching continued, my gut told me this wasn't some small animal. I peeked through the small slit in my mask, trying to stay calm and keep my breathing steady. The scratching stopped, and silence filled the room again. But the kind of silence that feels thick, like something's holding its breath with you. Then I saw it. The door handle started to move, slowly, turning with a soft click. The door opened just a crack, and something began to emerge. A head, shriveled and dark, with hollow eye sockets and an impossibly long neck. As the creature crawled out, my whole body screamed at me to run. But I stayed still, hoping the mask, the darkness, and my stillness would keep me hidden. The creature was skeletal, barely covered in skin, moving with jerky, unnatural motions as it crawled closer, looking directly at where I lay. Then, it whispered, "Strange. It has no fear of me." Its voice was ragged, like sandpaper on wood, and I felt chills run through me. I forced myself to stay still, barely breathing, hoping it couldn't see me. It leaned closer, sniffing the air around me. "It has no face," it murmured, almost in horror, backing away slightly. Then louder, it hissed, "It has no face." Suddenly my alarm went off. The shrill noise filled the room, shattering the tense silence. The creature screeched, recoiling from the bed, stumbling backward like it was blinded by the sound. In a panic, I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight to strobe mode, and aimed it directly at the creature. It shrieked again, louder, retreating toward the closet. I kept the light on it, inching closer to the door, and as I watched, it backed up until it was fully inside the closet. I bolted forward, slamming the door shut and locking it. I ran out into the snow, not looking back. My heart was racing so hard it drowned out every other sound as I floored it back down the gravel road. By the time I reached the nearest town, the sun was starting to rise. I parked at a convenience store and just sat there, shaking, my face buried in my hands. I was alive. I had made it. When I went into the store, the cashier looked at me with surprise. "Rough night?" he asked, and before I knew it, I was spilling the whole story. I expected him to laugh, but instead, he turned pale. He told me about a friend of his who had stayed at that very cabin on a dare years ago, only to be found days later, mutilated. The details were gruesome, but it was the face that stood out. His friend's face had been removed, smooth, just like the figures in that painting. As I stood there, the realization sank in. My mask had hidden my face from that creature, convinced I was like it, faceless. Ever since that night, I haven't slept without my half mask. It saved my life. I'm married now, and my wife thinks it's just a quirk, but she understands. I've even told her the story. It's a piece of my past that I'll never shake off completely. Some things, once you face them, stay with you forever. That night, I learned there are things in this world that we'll never understand. And sometimes, the only thing between life and death is a thin piece of fabric, just enough to hide your face from whatever might be watching.